What up, guys? Joachim here, Joachim Justin Morgan, and we are continuing in our discussion, our video series on why so many Catholics and Protestants alike have converted and joined the Orthodox Church in the past number of years. If you're watching this video in the future, today is February 7th, 2025, when I'm recording this. I should be uploading it either today or in the next couple days. But this video will cover worship and liturgy. Worship and liturgy, I believe, are amongst one of the more persuasive reasons that many people have from various backgrounds have converted and joined the Orthodox Church. I myself had this same experience of coming to an Orthodox church and experiencing the Divine Liturgy and being, I guess you'd say, taken aback or overwhelmed by the service itself, and by ultimately the drawing of the Holy Ghost, the experience of Christ, that is. So in other, faith traditions, you do hear sometimes the Divine Liturgy referred to as the Mass. This is more typical of the Latin West or the Catholic Church. Within, obviously, Western Rite Orthodox churches that are theologically under the Eastern Orthodox Church, they have Eastern bishops, but they have Western traditions. They celebrate like the liturgy of Saint Gregory the Great or some variation of that. They will actually use this term, Mass. And within Eastern Rite parishes, even now, sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as the Mass. More commonly, though, it's known as the Divine Liturgy. This is because in Greek, the word for the liturgy is, Thea Liturgia, or Thea Liturgia, the Divine Liturgy. And so that's kind of the way it's referred to. I think in Latin, there's actually something very similar. That's just not what they call it, though. At the end of the service, there is a sending of the people that the priest does. And this, in Latin, I think is missale or something like that. And that word means to send, and that's where actually you get the term Mass from. It's actually a Latin word. It means to send. So these are definitely things I think that are probably part of the Divine Liturgy that we do, because the liturgies of, say, St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil the Great are very similar to the liturgy of St. Gregory the Great. There's not really a lot of difference between them. The only real difference is there's a couple parts in the prayers that are said that change. So ultimately, they should be very similar. The only difference is that one is being translated from Greek and one is in Latin. And, as English speakers, we just have them all in English. So that's not really a big deal. One thing that is a big deal, though, is that the Orthodox Church has traditionally always done these liturgies in English. So that will probably come up, I think, in a little bit. I have it in one of my points here. But number one is the Divine Liturgy as an encounter with Christ. Number two is the liturgical continuity with the early church. Number three is the full body worship, which includes icons, incense, chant, and many other things that I'll discuss. Number four is the Orthodox liturgy and its emphasis with mystery over explanation. And then number five is the Eucharist as the center of worship. And so these are all things that I think are important to Orthodox Christian worship, and I think that people from various backgrounds find compelling when they come and visit an Orthodox church. Converts frequently describe the worship as deeply beautiful, as reverent, as spiritually transformative, and offering a profound sense of participation in the mystery of Christ. So the Divine Liturgy as an encounter with the divine, we really take our liturgy from the experience of the prophet Isaiah. I believe it's in chapter 6. Isaiah is caught up into the heavens. There's a famous Protestant song, and it goes something like, I saw the Lord seated on the throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple with glory. So this is from that same passage. It's a famous evangelical, Pentecostal hymn. But it speaks of that experience, and that is what Orthodox Christians experience in the liturgy. In fact, the liturgy itself is largely revolves around that passage. When we go forward to take communion, it is literally part of the process. It looks like a spoon when you take communion, but it's called the Levi, which means tongs. So when Isaiah is called forth, the voice from God comes forth in heaven and says, who will go, who will go to this people? And the prophet Isaiah responds and says, I am a man of unclean lips, and I am from a people of unclean lips. And then the angel takes the tongs from the altar and takes a coal and takes it and touches it to its lips, touches it to the prophet Isaiah's lips, and says, behold, you have been made clean. And so this exact wording, many of these exact same phrases are directly quoted when the priest gives you communion and you go forth to the chalice. Everything about the chalice, the spoon that he's using being referred to as tongs or the Levi. Like, these are all direct references to that passage where Isaiah is experiencing this same experience. He's experiencing the divine liturgy in heaven. So it is quite literally and quite directly a heavenly experience. I'll go more into that when we discuss the mystery of it. But unlike many modern worship services that focus on entertainment, emotional appeal, or didactic teaching, the Orthodox Divine Liturgy is designed to lift believers into the heavenly realm. Converts often say that Orthodox worship feels timeless and transcendent, as though they are participating in something eternal rather than attending a religious event. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors of all time, once said that the modern habit of doing church work with a high sense of drama is no substitute for the overwhelming experience of the numinous. Many converts feel that the Orthodox liturgy provides that numinous experience, the noetic experience of being caught up into the heavens. This is not replicated outside the Orthodox Church. There is no comparison to this. Many Western Rite Latin Catholics that go to the very few parishes that exist that still do the Tridentine Mass, they have to experience it in Latin because the Tridentine Mass is not done in English or in any other language than Latin. And those churches which still do that or still practice that particular liturgy are very few and far between. Even then, I don't think they really experience the same thing that we as Orthodox Christians experience. But that would be something that within the Catholic world is more similar to that experience. But so my first, I'm going to continue on in my points. I do want to come back and revisit my own personal experience in visiting an Orthodox church for the first time, though. So I'll go into that at the end. You'll hear a little bit more about my experience, but my second point with this is liturgical continuity with the early church. One of the biggest draws for Protestants and then Catholics alike is that Orthodox worship today is almost identical to the way that Christians worshiped 1,500 years ago. Contrasting that with Protestants, many Protestants, after learning about early Christian worship, began to realize that contemporary Protestant services with praise bands, casual sermons, and simplified rituals have little in common with how Christians worshipped for the first 1,500 years. Contrasting that with Catholics, many Catholics feel that post-Vatican II changes, such as the shift away from Latin, the removal of iconostas-like barriers, and more casual liturgical practices have diminished the sense of mystery in their worship. When converts attend an Orthodox service, they often describe the feeling of coming home to worship styles that reflect the unchanging and ancient nature of Christ and his church. When I went to be a teacher at a Catholic school, I was, I guess the word would be flabbergasted. I was in shock the first time I saw children skip up onto the stage and lean against the altar. In the Orthodox Church, unless you are directly invited by the priest, who himself only has permission on the basis of the bishop giving him allowance, we do not enter into the altar space. This is not permissible. It is a holy place. It is sanctified and set apart. It is the place where the elements, the body and blood, become the flesh and blood of Christ. So to sashay onto the area of the altar and lean against the altar itself is quite a boldness that I would not have guessed. And yet priests, teachers, and other Catholics were present and said nothing about this. In fact, later in the year, and on many occasions, I actually saw them invite the kids up onto the stage, and they treated it like it were a assembly hall stage rather than an altar dedicated to the worship of the Most High God. This is not a church, period. I don't mean any offense to Catholics themselves. You come from an ancient and beautiful tradition, but you're part of a church that deviated from the church, and that's reflected in those sacrilegious practices that are permissible and completely encouraged and allowed. Sorry. Number 3, I'll continue on, moving away from that point, but full body worship with icons, incense, and chants. Orthodox worship engages all the senses, creating an immersive experience. So as far as your sight, smell, hearing, and touch of movement goes, icons fill the church, often from the very top of the ceiling, a dome if the church has it, to the bottom portions of the walls. There are icons of all the prophets, of the apostles, of the saints and martyrs that have shed their blood in purple and gold, clothing the church over the past 2,000 years. And these figures clothe our church. They remind us they are part of the great cloud of witnesses that surrounds Orthodox Christians as we stand before the Most High God, looking into his altar, joining with the totality of heaven on a time outside of the experience of this earth, and engage and participate with the host of heaven in worship and adoration of Christ. So this is icons. These are windows into heaven, we usually say. And it visually teaches us theology and reminds us of these principles. There's the smell of incense that rises and symbolizes the prayers ascending to God and reinforces the sacramental atmosphere that we are walking and exist in. As I mentioned before, the passage from Isaiah, the smoke arising from the incense, it replicates this experience of the train of his robe filling the temple with glory. It's a reference to the first temple where smoke filled the temple and filled the tabernacle even before that, when Moses and the people were unable to worship because of it filling the tabernacle. We hear chants and hymns, many of them dating back well over 1,000 years, that invoke the worship of every generation of Christians that have sung the glory of God with these same hymns before us in every generation since the day of Pentecost. And then we touch and move about the church. We stand, we cross ourselves. We make the sign of the cross, which is the power of God unto salvation. We bow, we venerate the icons and engage the whole person in worship. Many former Protestants find this physical engagement compelling because it emphasizes that worship is not just an intellectual or emotional experience. If you are coming from many Reformed Protestant traditions, then they have tried to intellectualize the experience of God. So the fact that we baptize babies or allow infants to participate in communion is foreign to them because they believe in an intellectual type of worship. This is not the case in the Orthodox Church. We worship by faith, so the same faith that it takes for an infant to receive baptism and participate in communion is the only faith that's necessary for an adult to do so. There are many theological errors that I believe exist within this idea that somehow you intellectually need to perceive these things. They are not intellectually appraised, but they are appraised through the power of the Holy Ghost. Number 4, the Orthodox liturgy and its emphasis on mystery over explanation. I've kind of already alluded to many of these things leading up to now, but Protestant worship often prioritizes teaching or sermons that are central, and worship styles that can be adjusted based on audience preference. This is not the case in the Orthodox Church, obviously. Or Catholic liturgy, while still highly reverent, has in some cases become more simplified and less awe-inspiring for some traditionally minded Catholics. When I was teaching at a Catholic school, they sang Protestant hymns and Protestant like praise band worship songs. Many cases, the songs that we did throughout an entire liturgy were written by people who weren't even Catholic and wouldn't be even able to participate in the liturgy had they themselves attended. And yet we were singing their songs, or I wasn't singing them, but they were singing them there. It was wild. So these are not things that we practice in the Orthodox Church. Our hymns are often written by saints from many generations ago that bled and died or sacrificed their whole life for the establishment and continuation of the church. Orthodox worship is it does not seek to explain everything rationally the way that Protestant and really also Catholic worship does. It draws the worship into the mystery of Christ, the mystery of his church. There is no rush. There's no attempt to make things more accessible. There is instead the worshiper being invited to go deeper into the sacramental reality of the Eucharist, the icons, and the prayers cried out from every generation, from the saints, from martyrs, and from the apostles, going back every generation since the time of Christ. Number 5, and our last kind of central point on this, is the Eucharist as the center point of worship. Many Protestants who become Orthodox are deeply impacted by the sacramental nature of Orthodox worship, especially regarding the Eucharist. In the book of Corinthians, Paul speaks of the Eucharist, telling the church at Corinth that many of you have become sick and died because you partook of it in an unworthy manner. This is not the same Eucharist that Protestants talk about when they talk about communion. Protestants don't have this. Protestant communion is often regarded as just symbolic. Well, I'm sorry, Protestants, especially evangelical Protestants, symbols don't make you sick and die because you take of it in an unworthy manner. You are not part of that same church that Paul wrote to. And that's a sad reality, but it's the truth. It's a reality that you need to hear and you need to understand and you need to come to grips with so that you can seek out Christ Church and find it. Protestants have come to reject this symbol-only view of communion, and they realize that the early church has always taught that the Eucharist is truly the body of Christ and truly his own blood, as seen in the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was an apostle of John, who was a disciple of the Apostle John, St. Justin Martyr, very famous 2nd century martyr, and St. Irenaeus. Many Catholics feel disconnected from the modern Catholic Mass, and they find the Orthodox Eucharist theology and reverence to be closer to the early church's practice, and they find this as a draw, as a connection, as something that brings them to the Orthodox Church. So why worship? Orthodox worship specifically draws converts from both Catholicism and Protestantism. For Protestants, they feel that modern church services are too casual, entertainment-driven, and disconnected from early Christian worship. They often find orthodoxy, on the other hand, to be rich, historical, reverent, and the liturgical experience of the first century through every generation until now. It's not something that we created. It's not something that we made up. It's not something that we intellectually and cerebrally went to the scriptures and tried to extract. It is what we have inherited. It is the inheritance of modern Christians and all who unite themselves to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Orthodox Church. That is our inheritance. That is what has been passed down from us from the apostles. And those who join themselves to her experience that. For Catholics who are disillusioned with post Vatican II liturgical silliness and changes, they often find Orthodox worship has preserved the sacred, has preserved the mysterious and transcendent nature of the liturgy of worship and of Christian heritage from generations past that they long for. So I said that I would go into some detail on my own experience. I'm losing my voice, and I'm going to go ahead and try to cut this off now, but just to briefly describe my own personal experience, the first time I came to an Orthodox church, I was overwhelmed. Not just the physical experience of it, but I recognized, having studied Second Temple Judaism in very great depth, I recognized the pattern of the church as I walked in and found this interesting. I recognized the description of the altar, which I had never seen anything like that before. When I came into the Orthodox Church, I recognized the description of an iconostas from the veil in the temple. I recognized the architecture of the church as being modeled after the temple. These are not things that I had considered or even thought about. I recognized the incense being offered and the deacon going around swinging the incense. Or I recognized the processions of the gospel books and the processions of the Eucharist as being a continuation of sacramental Old Testament worship, but having been reinterpreted, having been sacramentally brought forward into the epoch, into the time of Christ, into the reigning of Christ over the earth. And these were all overwhelming to me. It wasn't just the physical experience, which I think is what people tend to hear when I discuss this. As English-speaking Western people, we like to rationalize things, but that would be a diminishment of what I'm trying to express, which is that I recognized in the Orthodox Church the very first time I came the experience of Old Testament believers who were looking for the coming of Christ. And I found that and was overcome and overwhelmed by the experience of having had it unlocked to me in that moment when I came to visit an Orthodox church for the first time. I remember going home and sleeping for hours, just exhausted from the experience, just overwhelmed. My thoughts, my experience, everything was overwhelming. And it took me some time after that, months, to wrap my mind around what I had experienced. But and it didn't even work. I after having experienced that, I wish I could say that I never looked back, but I actually rationalized the whole experience because I am a Western person and tend to do that, like many people do, and dismissed it. But then I, over time, continued to come back to it again and again and again. All directions and things that I was pursuing were towards Christ, which all led back continually to the Orthodox Church, which is why me and my family were eventually united to her through our desire and longing to experience Christ. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I have a few more, but like I said, I'm losing my voice now, and I'm going to cut it off there. You guys take it easy, and I'll talk to you in a video coming soon.